Alors, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis Graham Carr, le recteur de l'Université Concordia. And of course, if you're here in the room or watching this session online, it's for certain because you're well aware of the extraordinary threats that cybersecurity poses for all organizations and even for us as individuals, but also some of the opportunities that the cybersecurity world creates. And fortunately, and I hope I don't jinx it by saying it, I'd like to believe that in Canada, we're pretty well prepared by comparison with many countries in terms of how we set about to face these challenges. Our federal government's Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is the single unified source of expert advice, guidance, services, and support for Canadians. And this agency is Canada's eyes and ears on this front, and it's headed admirably by Sami, Khoury, who I'm proud to say is a two-time Concordia graduate and a member of today's panel. Mais aussi, le gouvernement du Québec est en voie de créer le ministère de la cybersécurité. Il s'agit d'un geste stratégique remarquable, le premier de genre en Amérique du Nord. À Concordia, nous trouvons ces mesures très encourageantes. For those of you who don't know us, Concordia is an urban university with two campuses here in Montreal. We have more than 50,000 students, more than 10,000 of whom come from some 150 countries around the world. And we have a very diverse faculty complement as well. And we've been ranked by Times Higher Education as among the world's 200 most international universities. And for the past 3 years, I'm also proud to say we've been ranked by QS in London as the top university less than 50 years old in all of North America. Concordia est une université nouvelle génération, c'est-à-dire que nous consacrons nos efforts à résoudre aujourd'hui les défis de demain. Notre réputation repose en grande partie sur nos travaux d'avant-garde en cybersécurité. Dès 2003, nous avons positionné la cybersécurité comme domaine de recherche et d'enseignement supérieur. Et en 2005, Concordia a été la première université canadienne à créer des programmes d'études en cybersécurité. Et nous avons ainsi contribué à faire de Montréal un pôle de talent dans ce domaine. Le Centre de recherche sur la sécurité, ou SRC, a formé des milliers de spécialistes en cybersécurité et assure à l'industrie un approvisionnement continu en personnel très qualifié. The SRC also has 5 industrial research chairs and has led many successful collaborations with such companies as Google, Bell, Videotron, and Nokia, as well as with major governmental organizations such as National Defense, the RCMP, the CRTC, and the Competition Bureau. And like our SRC, Concordia's Applied AI Institute, which we launched this past March, is quickly becoming a major center for collaboration. It's an institute which is extremely cross-disciplinary in its approach to this very prevalent technology, uniting some 95 faculty members and more than 200 graduate students from all 4 of our faculties, grouped into clusters focusing on society, the social impact of AI, on science, and on emerging technology. And together, our SRC and Applied AI Institute are such recognized talent hubs that Concordia was chosen to co-lead Canada's new National Cybersecurity Consortium. We're co-leading it with 4 other universities across the country. Ce réseau de 160 millions de dollars créé en février dernier aide les institutions et les entreprises canadiennes à gérer les cybermenaces grâce à ces innovations, à ces travaux de recherche et développement et à ces activités de formation. Cette initiative nécessaire nous démarque d'autres pays occidentaux dans la mesure où elle jette des ponts entre les secteurs privés et publics par l'intermédiaire des universités canadiennes. Le consortium démontre aussi clairement le rôle central que joue l'université dans l'évolution de notre économie, du savoir et la formation de la prochaine génération du talent qualifié et avant-gardiste qui l'alimente. Convier des spécialistes à échanger des idées et à réseauter est une priorité pour nous à Concordia et pour les conférences de Montréal. Et je tiens à remercier la conférence de son travail exceptionnel année après année et d'avoir invité Concordia à participer à 3 des séances d'aujourd'hui. And now, to lead this afternoon's discussion, it's my pleasure to introduce Concordia Professor Mourad Debbabi. Mourad's a highly sought-after expert in cybersecurity. He wears many hats. He's the director of the Concordia Security Research Lab, that I mentioned previously. He is one of the lab's 5 industrial research chairs working with Hydro-Québec in smart grid security, and is also the outstanding dean of our Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science, and I'm also really pleased that Gina herself is with us this afternoon. And Mourad, finally, is one of the National Cybersecurity Consortium's co-founding executive directors. That's enough from me. I'll turn it over to Mourad now for the panel. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Graham, for these kind remarks. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to moderate this roundtable with renowned experts such as Charles, Wendy, and Sami. And before diving into the heart of the matter, I'd like to give a very short preamble, just mentioning some cybersecurity facts. There is a cyber attack occurring every 39 seconds. And honestly, myself looking at some of the intel sources, I can say that we see much more than that. A ransomware attack happens every 10 seconds. Data breaches exposed 36 billion records in the first half of 2020. Companies can take up to 6 months to detect and mitigate an attack. By 2025, cybercrime is expected to cost the world about $10.5 trillion per year. So this is to say that the situation is very serious and it need to be dealt with in the proper way. Attacks are becoming very sophisticated. We started to see stealthy attacks against critical infrastructure, and just to mention a few examples, the InController malware, the industrial malware, Triton malware, and so on, that targeted sensitive sector of the critical infrastructure like power systems, energy power plants, and so on. Alongside, software supply chain attacks are starting to proliferate, and we have seen some very prominent examples such as SolarWinds, Cassia, and Log4j, just to mention a few. Such attack can inflict catastrophic economic damages, can disrupt the public services, can compromise the safety, and undermine public confidence. So the title of the roundtable is The Future of Cybersecurity, and the present is the foundation of the future. So I'd like to start by asking a question on the current state of cybersecurity in terms of threat and threat actors and what they are trying to achieve. And in this regard, I'd like to give the floor to Wendy to comment on what do we see today in terms of threat actors, and what they are trying to achieve.
Sure, glad to share. I think about this in terms of the attackers and what they're attacking. When we think about the attackers, there's really 2 broad categories of those who are cyber criminals and nation-state actors, and there's a wide difference in sophistication and objectives and targets for those organizations. And maybe I'll let Sami speak more to the nation-state side, and I'll talk a little bit about the e-crime side. What we see, we track about 250 threat actor groups around the world. There's a small subset of those that tend to do the majority of the damage, and we see their attacks tending to be successful across a few industry verticals where the money is, where they can extract payments via ransomware, primarily healthcare, manufacturing, and unfortunately, a lot of regional level governments, municipalities, cities. So certainly federal governments are being attacked, but those cities, the asymmetry between their defense and the success of the attack and the ability to extract payment is certainly a lucrative area for cyber criminals. What we see in terms of their methodologies of attack, so how are they getting in, really not changing that much, can ebb and flow over time, but it's about a third where they're compromising the credentials, so they have somehow found a way to get someone to click and they can get your login credentials for a system. A third, they are constantly scanning for software vulnerabilities that have not been patched. So when we issue unclean software and use it in our business, we have a backdoor that's constantly unlocked. And then a third of what I'll call commodity malware that you can purchase very cheaply on the internet and use that to exploit a vulnerability. And I'd say the most interesting thing around the e-crime side is that they operate like a business. Large criminal organizations operate like a business. They have a business model where they've divided and conquered. We often see models where you have an operator who's responsible for developing the malware, and you have initial access brokers. They find that unlocked door and sell that to an affiliate who actually deploys the malware that they've gotten from the operator against the access they've gotten from the broker. Everybody spreads the money around, and they all specialize in certain areas. And so while we do not see these attacks as terribly targeted, they're really looking for that unlocked door. They're opportunistic. We call them vultures, not eagles. It can do the same kind of damage to an organization once that ransomware is deployed. Maybe that's kind of the e-crime quick summary. Maybe talk a little bit about the nation state.
Yes, Sami, if you can shed some light on the state-sponsored attacks.
So at the Cyber Center, we put out a national cyber threat assessment that tries to paint what is the threat against Canada. Absolutely two buckets, cybercrime and nation state. I completely agree with Wendy's assessment. It is what we are seeing in Canada in terms of the number one threat being cybercrime manifested in ransomware. But in terms of nation state, this is another factor that is very concerning. And the Cyber Center lives within the communication security establishment, which also has which has an intelligence mission. So we are very much informed by what it is that our intelligence is telling us about nation states. Nation states tend to go after two things. One is traditional espionage, so what is the government up to, but also go after intellectual property. And that is an area of great concern for us because Canada is a bed of innovation, of research, and it's heartbreaking when we see nation states sort of steal that intellectual property or that innovation that is in Canada and appropriate it. We named for the first time in our 2020 annual report the 4 countries that are the most culprits, so Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And we continue to see them act with impunity in those spaces, and that is an area of great concern for us. I'll add a small dimension. Obviously, the Ukraine-Russia conflict is another one that is of concern. And even though it might seem like half a world away, we are seeing repercussions of what is happening in the Ukraine, DDoS attacks, very destructive wiper malwares being deployed in the Ukraine, but also potentially being deployed elsewhere in Canada. And also a lot of misinformation out there. And we have taken the unusual step of declassifying some of our intelligence to counter the misinformation that we are seeing. So even though it's happening in the Ukraine, we are very much concerned about making sure that Canadian businesses, Canadian citizens are well informed by the threat that's out there.
Thank you so much, Sami. Charles, the open source can be a vehicle for some of these attacks. If you can share some insights in this regard.
Yeah, there's a tremendous use of open source in the world today. Lots of systems consist mostly of open source, and open source is an attack vector for malware. People have very little knowledge of in large software systems where the software is coming from. So that's partially why the Biden government came up with executive order, which is requiring a software bill of materials for federal purchases. And I think that approach to look at a software bill of materials to understand what's in your open source is critical across the entire industry in the future, because similar to what's been previously stated, I do believe the cyber attackers are becoming more organized. You see malware as a service and more information sharing. So one attack will be replicated, and nation states or people will pretend to be other attackers to throw off the signals. But certainly, I do believe the open source is a big part of the area we need to protect. I heard a phrase just to tee up the session: death, taxes, and cyber attacks is the guarantees. So just it's quite prevalent.
Thank you so much, Charles. I would like to move to another very important topic that is on the defense side, how we can mitigate these attacks. And in particular, I'm more interested in the economics of cyber attacks. The cost to defend against these attacks exceed by far the cost of engineering these attacks. Sami mentioned some of these huge or humongous denial of service attacks. It takes just a small piece of code that can be written by people with not very advanced expertise to trigger a huge or a massive denial of service attacks or a reflection attacks. So the question is how to make it difficult for attackers, how to increase exponentially the cost of delivering and landing these attacks. So Charles, if you can comment on this.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. Certainly, I think part of the strategy for, like, it's interesting when you look at it, an attacker only has to get in once, and if you're protecting 10,000 assets, you have to protect them all. So the physics don't really work in the favor of, it works in the favor of the bad actor. I do believe there's a certain amount of, this isn't that exciting, basic hygiene that you can do. I don't think there's a lot of attacks, successful attacks today, that someone on the planet doesn't know how to block. So there's a lot of good methods, like the Canada Centre for Cybersecurity. If you follow their recommendations for small and medium business, doing software updates and good cyber hygiene, I think that's really important. I think another important area is to resilience. So design your system expecting to be attacked, and then know what you will do with tabletop exercises when that attack happens, so you can continue to run without larger impact to your organization. And I think there's a game-changing step function in our ability to do data analytics and monitor for anomalies using tools like machine learning and AI that allows us to detect things. Like it's easier to detect things we've seen before, but learning how to detect the unexpected, things that smell bad, that are doing things that are irregular, I think is a really important part of the strategy. So sort of more automation and more tooling, but also there's a lot we know that if we do it, then we'll be able to protect.
Thank you. So Charles, I will pick on this issue of making it much more difficult to attack. And there are the current way we approach security is that we do firewalling, network segmentation, we do antivirus technology, we do security monitoring of networks, and so on. But this is on the defense side. So if you would like to make it difficult, Sami, for example, there are things that comes to mind. For example, having a moving target defense, like changing the configuration of our cyber infrastructure, like making it difficult by having, for example, deception technology deployed and other things. So what are the kind of things that we can do to make it really difficult? Not just defending, but also making it difficult to the attackers.
I think, as Charles pointed out, our job as defenders is one of the toughest jobs. Defending the government, the federal government, is extremely complex, and daily we see between 3 and 5 billion, malicious signals coming at us, and we have to ground it. But it's a huge learning opportunity. Sure, some of them do come through, and we learn a lot from those incidents. But it's about sharing what we learn. But also, inviting others who have been victims of incidents to reach out to us and share with us what it is that they have seen, so that we can update our advice and guidance and raise the collective bar across Canada. There are other things in terms of partnerships that I'm absolutely in favor of, whether it's domestic partnerships, international partnerships with like-minded countries who share the same concern about cybersecurity. But also, at the end of the day, we still have some authorities within the communication security establishment that if we have to conduct cyber operations to impose a cost on those perpetrators, we do have those authorities. So we then work with our international partners to impose that cost. So it's a spectrum of capability. It's not just firewalls and blocking, but also awareness. It's education. It's sharing of information, but also having those resources available that we could use, and also with our federal law enforcement colleagues to prosecute where need be. So it's a defense in layers that we are promoting.
So is offensive technologies also one option among the...
It is an option. We prefer to call it, cyber operations and not get into the offensive versus defensive. But it is one of the tools that we have available if we need to, and proper authorizations from the minister. But we will deploy them.
Very good, very good. So, Wendy, what else could be done to increase the cost of attacks, to make it very difficult for attackers?
Believe it or not, just like we all know that we should eat right and exercise to stay healthy and lose weight, it really is the basics in security. I think Charles alluded to this. There are very few attacks, other than by very sophisticated nation-state actors, that could not be prevented or quickly detected and remediated before they were able to steal data or encrypt systems. And those things are straightforward. If anybody is using your pet's name or your child's name in your passwords, you're part of the problem. So leave this room, promise me that you will fix that. But multi-factor authentication, the network segmentation we've talked about, there are things even we as individuals can do to make all of us collectively a harder target, so that they have to spend more time and effort in order to get that one win. And so it just starts to tip the economics on their head, and that's how you turn the tide, is really just make it too costly to make it worthwhile to come after your information or your assets.
Thank you, Wendy. Wendy, I'd like to continue with you, and I'd like to touch on a topic that was mentioned by Charles, which is resilience, cyber resilience. So the current doctrine that is, or our current approach to cybersecurity is more about preventing, detecting, and mitigating attacks. What we need to shift more to cyber resilience, where the focus is going to be on anticipating the attacks, predicting, preventing, detecting, but also surviving. If the attack happens, we need to survive. We need to sustain the core services. We need also to have the possibility to recover and adapt to attacks and so on. So what does it take to change the culture or our approach to cybersecurity, from cybersecurity to cyber resilience?
That's a great question. The idea that security is the job of agencies or your security team, that's really no longer the case. We talk about security in sort of stages, and you alluded to the last stage. You prevent absolutely everything that you can. Good passwords, multi-factor, antivirus, all of those things, just good basic hygiene. But you also have to have full visibility. It's in the market, it's starting to be called XDR, or extended detection and response, to be able to see those anomalous activities that you want to investigate, but to use automation and really machine learning and other things in order to accelerate that investigation process. What we see is that the mean dwell time of threat actors once they've entered your environment versus when they do damage, the average is 11 days. The median is less than 5 days. And the maximum is about 70 days. So you don't have a lot of time when you see that anomalous activity to evict them. And so that speed of automation is really important. But you raised the last piece, which is the most important, which is unfortunately prepare for the worst, so that your recovery time, your systems are back up and running, your employees are back at work, your customers are being served as quickly as possible. And even at Secureworks, where we have the best security technology, the most security experts, we run a tabletop twice a year. We report it to our board of if we were hit with ransomware tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., who would we tell? Who would we, what would we do? It's all about communication and coordination before the crisis hits. And in the end, all of us who have, seen a pipeline, stop the gas shipments in the eastern coast of the U.S. or not been able to have surgery at a hospital or children can't go to school, that recovery time is probably the most important piece once that breach has happened.
Wendy, you did touch on attacks on critical infrastructure, and I'd like to ask Sami about how to make our CI, our critical infrastructure, much more resilient. So I think this is not a luxury, this is something that is absolutely needed. We cannot afford to lose power or to lose connectivity or to lose access to our financial services. So what do we need to do to make our critical infrastructure much more resilient?
The threat to the critical infrastructure is a real threat. We've seen instances in Europe. Russia has brought down the Ukrainian electricity grid a few times in the past. So there are capabilities out there that can be very disastrous. It's a concern for us in Canada, and working with the CI operators, whether it's the energy sector, the transportation sector, the financial sector, to raise awareness, to raise, bring the concern to attention. We share everything we know. The definition of resilience is anticipate, withstand, and recover. So the anticipation part is something that we bring to the cybersecurity space, and we use our intelligence mission to inform the CI sector if we see anything, but it's definitely about partnership with them. They know their networks more than anything. There's no way in the world that I can appreciate the complexity of the CI network, and especially the OT side of a CI network. So it's about partnering with them. It's about appreciating what it is that they have on their network, and raising the awareness of the threat.
Thank you so much, Sami. So, Charles, any thoughts on how to be ahead of the game and anticipate attacks? And
it's interesting. I look at this I'm looking at it through a lens. We have something. We're in a lot of automobiles, so automotive cybersecurity. It tended to look like a recipe for resilience for me, and that includes things like supply chain, use trusted components, have a system with isolation. Do in-field, like in-service checks that you've been compromised. Have an attack plan when you are compromised, and those sorts of things for resilience. But the other, probably the last one in that checklist is sort of a security culture. So look at the attacks. If you're thankfully not the one that was attacked, apply that as a tabletop exercise to see how you would prevent against it. You were lucky this time. But luck isn't a good thing. So just going through those sorts of checklists. I think we discussed earlier, Mourad, also not to have a homogeneous system, single points of failure. Every computer running the same operating system that gets attacked in the same attack vector is not good. It's not good for business. So those are just some
absolutely the diversification of the technology stack and the redundancy and other means can help achieve much more resilience. So this brings me to a question about the cybersecurity talent and the cybersecurity talent shortage. For instance, Sami mentioned the importance to have experts that will administer the security of IT and OT technologies. So in some sectors of the CI, it's not easy to train experts in that field. It's a multidisciplinary area. You need people with a full understanding of the physical systems. In the case of an electric grid, it's power systems. You need people in control. You need people with cybersecurity knowledge. So it takes a lot to do a training of these experts. So my question to Sami, how we can build effective partnerships to train experts that can administer and operate the security of, for example, our critical infrastructure?
we definitely have a talent shortage, and we can't find enough people to join us. But having said that, I think there's an opportunity here to partner with education institution to develop programs to help augment the talent capacity in those spaces. We grew up understanding IT and IT security, and I wish we grew up university taking courses on OT and industrial control system and mechanical systems and how the interconnect between them. So I look forward maybe to working with the academic sector, and we have a program at the Cyber Center to work with the academic community to develop these cybersecurity program and tweak them in the space of OT, industrial control system. We need to build labs where we can experiment with ICS systems, SCADA systems, and understand real life impact of something going wrong. I'd rather learn it in a lab than learn it on a real network where we get called and say we had a cyber incident. So this is the kind of partnerships that we need in the Canadian ecosystem, academic, industry, businesses, where we can develop that talent in real life examples of technology.
So, Sami, I fully agree with you on the need of partnership. We need to join forces because, as you mentioned, these experts need to be trained on the right infrastructure, and for that we need the expertise and we need the infrastructure from the public and the private sectors both. So Charles, on the topic of talent shortage in the area of cybersecurity, how we can attract talent and how we can retain it?
Yeah, so I think there's a grassroots aspect to that. You know, just the general cyber. Wendy was teaching some of you, maybe some learned something today, but I think there's a lot of grassroots potential. I also, you know, a slight nuance in this. I think there's a there's a talent to technology gap. So I'm a technology CTO, right? So I think we need to make the humans that are already there much more powerful. So we need automation, and we need to do innovation with academia and government and private sector to make us more powerful. Think Iron Man, right? So, but you know, more formal awareness, like more formal university programs, I think is important. And something else that I've talked with some people here at the conference, reskilling our workforce. So there's a lot of awareness that's growing, and there's a lot of skills, be it data science or cybersecurity, where people can sort of evolve in their career and grow. We can grow those in our companies with partnerships with universities to train our staff. So I think it's, you know, there's a large need for more people. I definitely agree with Sami, but I also think we need to work smarter.
Thank you so much, Charles. Wendy, retention is key, and nowadays cybersecurity experts, they have huge number of opportunities. So one thing is attracting them and training them, and the other is retaining. So how we could approach retention?
I think about this a lot every day. So I think there are a few things that we all do, some unique, not unique to security, but some are. One is mission matters a lot. And so when we talk to cybersecurity professionals, we talk about the fact that they're really saving the world. They're working on one of the world's biggest next challenges. And so when they're in an organization where security is a function as opposed to the mission of the entire organization, tying their work to protecting the mission of the organization is really important, so that they feel like they're part of accelerating the mission of the business or the organization, as opposed to being a compliance or an audit or someone who steps in the way of what the business is trying to do. That removing that friction and making them part of the solution is really, really important to retain talent. And the second big one I'll share is that security is a little more unique to security, but other fields as well. It is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year job. And I don't know what it is, but every single holiday weekend, that is when the really big cyber attacks occur. Our team jokes about that going into a holiday weekend. but making sure that you have a structure that both anticipates that need for full coverage, but also gives them true downtime to recuperate and spend time with their family, as opposed to always being on an urgent situation, is also very important to avoid burnout and to retain them for the long term. So those are two of probably about 5 that are really key to retention.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I'm mindful of the time, and I'd like to save some time to maybe the most important question that is aligned with the title of the roundtable, which is the future of cybersecurity. So we spoke about the current state of cybersecurity. We did talk about some of the grand challenges in this area, like training, like the economics of cyber attacks, like cyber resilience and how to achieve it. So maybe the last question that I'd like to formulate is, on a time span of 5 years, what cybersecurity threat will persist? What are the top cybersecurity trends and long-term concerns? And in essence, how do you see the future of cybersecurity? Sami, we can start with you.
Not an easy question to answer, but I'll give it
3
a shot.
parts.
Yes, 3 parts. So I think there's the assessment that we've put out that says there will be breaches, there'll be cyber incidents. Cybercrime will continue to be the number 1 threat that we pose, that is posed against us. But on the topic of emergent technology, quantum, AI, these are things that are coming around the corner. I often hear Canada punches above its weight when it comes to those two domains, with some of the research and innovations happening even here in Montreal or elsewhere in Canada. Those technology are dual-use technology. Definitely, we want to make sure that we stay in sync with them, and NIST just released its quantum algorithms, so to proceed with caution in adopting some of these, but also to be mindful of the fact that along with quantum cryptography comes the challenge of a quantum computer. So look at your information, understand the lifespan of your information, because when a quantum computer comes, the cryptography of today will probably be broken. So we need to keep in mind that those emerging tech are excellent tools for us to protect us against the future, but also to be mindful of the threat that they can also pose. Likewise, in AI, it's about automation. How do we use AI to benefit us, to augment our capacity to triage more cyber incident, but also that AI can be used in an adversarial way against us by poisoning the algorithms, and to be very conscious of the risk that comes with it. So the future is still a bit cloudy, but I think there is hope that working together we can tackle it.
Absolutely. Wendy, can you shed some lights on what do you see?
Sure. There are some trends I think will absolutely continue. Emerging technologies being both a risk and an opportunity is certainly one of them. I think the other trends that will sort of continue and accelerate, that are important for what I think should change in the future of cybersecurity. We're still going to see that the number and type of devices that we all use to access information at work and personally continue to proliferate and change. These days, you really just need your identity in a browser to access whatever you need to on any type of device. So I know a lot of people talk about identity being the new perimeter, but it is no safer than the old perimeter. In fact, I worry that the damage of your identity being compromised can be even more damaging in an environment where that is how you access absolutely everything about your work and your personal life. So that move to identity and access-based security and controls, and frankly privacy, will become incredibly more important. So for me, the thing that I think really helps turn the tide beyond, I keep saying it, just getting some of the basics right, is that shared collaboration for standards of a duty of care for all of us. How do we educate all of us to be better fiduciaries of our data, to protect our identities, to protect our financial assets and information as both individuals and as employees of an organization? and to use the collaboration of industry, academia, and government to create education for citizenry, for organizations that just help us all adopt a minimum set of standards for that duty of care that frankly will increase that cost. And what my goal is every day is to turn that tide so that it's not an acceleration of damages, an acceleration of spend to prevent those damages, but really we start to change the ROI of this situation and turn it on its head. I think there's a real opportunity there for working together for that.
Thank you. Wendy, Charles, on the future of cybersecurity?
I think it's been perfectly defined. No, in fact, we're an awful agreeable panel, but I have to say I completely agree with the quantum in the AI and all the points made. There's probably one, and the need for collaboration. Maybe one thing I'll bring up that we haven't talked much about is the cyber-physical domain. Looking at the software-defined everything, I'll speak about software-defined vehicles. In the 5-year time frame, your vehicle will become more like a server. It will be 5G connected with lots of compute power with regular software updates. So that's a little bit scary. So those that don't learn from history are destined to repeat it. We need to apply all our best practices that we know to continue to make this vastly more connected, high bandwidth. Could you imagine the denial of service potential of all these connected vehicles? The numbers are going up in the IoT space incredibly. And so I think, we need to be on our best behavior to protect that. And I do think things like focusing on predictive AI, like detection is important, but prevention is also very important. And Wendy mentioned XDR, the ability to take different data sources and correlate it. If your identity has been compromised on your phone, your computer and your network access should be adjusted so the damage is contained, for example. So I think the other thing, there's lots of antiquated security practices that are hard-coded into our networks. We need to move to more zero trust philosophy. So the idea that you're given a job and you have the permission to do that for a duration of time, and then that permission goes away so that you don't leave this big backdoor, like Sami talked about IoT or OT networks and industrial control systems. They're notorious for hard-coded passwords or admin passwords or default passwords. So I think that's the cyber physicals, the new thing to add. The importance of things like NCC for doing industry research, government collaboration. Applaud Quebec for the first cybersecurity ministry, first one in North America. We're seeing governments push more cybersecurity initiatives, which is really good. So I think we're well positioned. I think to have we can be nimble enough, and we have the right people, talent to be leaders in this field. So I'm hopeful we can do that.
Thank you so much, Charles. So we have much more time to spend on this question. And you did spoke, Charles, about the cyber physical world. So, and also before Sami spoke about the importance of IT and OT. So we are very good at, we have a very good grasp of cybersecurity, and we know how to approach detection and mitigation to a large extent. But when it comes to the security of cyber physical system, this is kind of a new territory where we need to learn a lot. So there are other areas as well in cybersecurity where we need to learn. Like, for example, we are not good at measuring cybersecurity. For example, if you take a security operations center nowadays, they receive a huge number of events and incidents. But if you ask the question, what are the most important events and what's my posture of cybersecurity, that's not a straightforward question. Other areas that I can mention, for example, the area of vulnerability research. So we are very good at maybe patching or finding solution to vulnerabilities that we discover, but I think there is a lot to be done to be proactive, to clear all the connected devices from their vulnerabilities. So how do you see these kind of gaps that I mentioned, for example, in the future of cybersecurity? Are these areas that are going to be of interest in the coming in the coming years? Maybe you can start from Sami.
Absolutely. This is a team sport. It's a cliche, but I like it. And we all have to play our part. So vulnerability research is a huge deal. At the end of the day, there are vulnerabilities in software, and we need to close them quickly. But it's also, again, I go back to this idea of partnerships, that the only way to tackle that challenge is the challenge of cybersecurity and all of its component is through partnerships, partnership with academia, with businesses, with software vendors, with technology vendors. But it does take a village in a way to raise with citizens in education. So it does take an effort across the board.
Thank you, Sami. Wendy, any concluding remarks on this topic?
Sure. I don't know if you've ever looked at one of those puzzles where they sort of reveal pieces of it over time, and you see a black spot and an orange spot, and then slowly you realize that there's a tiger hidden behind that puzzle. When I think about security and prioritization specifically of where you focus your time, it is all about prioritization. And that prioritization requires the confluence of information. Where are we vulnerable? Who attacks and how? And what is it that they're going after, right? What is their intent to secure? And it's the combination of those three that really help us to focus on the things that create the most risk, are the most vulnerable, and the most likely to be exploited, that let us prioritize scarce resources and really use technology to do that. And that is absolutely how you turn and focus on preventing damage.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Charles, le mot de la fin?
Yes. I think I talked about the software bill of materials. One of the interesting things with that is you can now look at the vulnerabilities in the ingredients with which you're deploying. And it's not just the vulnerability, but the exploitability of that vulnerability. So you can prioritize your focus on the areas where you're most likely to get caught up. So when an expert asks you a question, if it's important, it was easy to say it's very important, Mourad. So, but yes, I think that's absolutely key to understand your risk profile in detail.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles. I don't know if we can take questions. Any questions from the audience? So please.
Hello, my name is François Bédard. I'm also a senior advisor into digital identity and also smart cities. So back to what Quebec did so far with la création du ministère de la cybersécurité. This is under Bill 6, which is actually done in January 2022. This is very new. But also, one of my questions, I have two questions. A professional question and a personal question. So professional, what do you expect from the public government in terms of regulations? First question. But second question, as a dad of 3 kids, and we are also parents, I expect, what should we say and what can we share with the next generation?
Thank you so much. Very good question. So, would like to answer?
I can tackle maybe the first part, which is
the second one.
which is what you can expect from public government, and I think what we can expect is that we have a role to play in making sure that the threat communities, citizens are aware of the threat. And as a result of being aware of what incidents are happening, and it is one of the challenges we have at the Cyber Center is that people don't report incidents. So when people don't report incidents, how can we provide actionable advice or actionable, meaningful threat information about there's something happening in that sense? So whether it's the Quebec or the federal government, I would hope that what comes out of this is more awareness of the threat and more involvement in making sure that for the betterment of society, we will share the threat, we will hold it in confidence, we will anonymize it, but then we will make sure that everybody knows that there's a threat against a specific sector or a new type of vector that's exploiting communities across Canada.
Thank you, Sami. Wendy, you'd like to answer the second main?
Probably both of us can do this one, but I'll share a couple because I am a mom, and this comes up a lot with anyone who has a teen with a phone. You understand how how incredibly vulnerable their information is, and if you're on a shared cloud, how vulnerable your information is. And we just share a couple of things. One, that we tie the physical world to the digital world. You wouldn't leave your laptop sitting around for someone to take it, or your phone sitting around for someone to take it. You need to think about the way you secure your digital assets the same way, through passwords and basic multi-factor authentication. It sounds fancy, but it's really quite simple. And if they get in the habit young of a different password for every app, they've already created a tremendous amount of protection should one company's passwords get divulged. And the second one we always talk about is just awareness, that people are looking to take your information. And so just a pragmatic wariness around certain kinds of emails that want you to click on absolutely anything, that don't do it, and a few tricks for hovering over where they're from. So I think the combination of awareness and some basic steps that they have to own, like they do to protect their phone, goes a long way to keeping you from having to wipe that phone.
Yeah, and I'll just reinforce, I think the government has an opportunity to sort of get more collaboration more quickly across various players in this. So I do think the regulations and setting standards and goals is part of, you know, how we go from this frozen state and actually take action. And I definitely agree that there's, you know, mobile apps are notoriously data hungry and insecure. So there's an awful lot of education, and, you know, anything that you put into a public device is public, or into your device has the high probability of being public. And so just that basic cyber awareness is important. I don't know if I mentioned it, we did a Girl Guides partnership where I think 5,600 Canadian girls got their cybersecurity awareness badge, just to try to give them some grassroots digital hacker mentality malware, and it was really enthusiastic to watch that happen.
Thank you so much, Charles. Maybe the last question, please.
Merci. Molière est arrivé plus rapidement dans mon village que Shakespeare. Donc je vais m'exprimer en français.
Okay.
Donc, je suis enseignant, chercheur à l'Université de Savoie. Je voudrais évoquer une dimension dont je n'ai pas beaucoup entendu. Évidemment, l'activité s'appelle, je crois, Conférence de Montréal. Et là, je vois quand même Forum économique international. Donc, c'est la dimension, justement, le terme simple, c'est international. Mais c'est toute la géographie mondiale. Alors, quel commentaire, n'est-ce pas, vous suscite par rapport à la thématique de cette session, par rapport à cette dimension géographique-là, où nous avons le nord, le sud, l'est, l'ouest. C'est vrai, j'ai entendu Russie, Khoury, tout, mais d'une manière beaucoup plus audacieuse et générale. Quel commentaire vous suscite pas cette dimension géographique, comme je le dis, où évidemment il y a l'interaction mondiale, les interactions, où il y a justement tous les systèmes sont interdépendants aujourd'hui, la mondialisation aidant, où les phénomènes comme l'insécurité et justement cybernétique est donc devenu mondial. Alors je voudrais votre petit commentaire rapidement sur cet aspect. Moi je viens d'Afrique, évidemment il y a beaucoup de choses qui se passent là-bas sur le plan de l'insécurité cybernétique. Et est-ce que ça vient du Nord? Est-ce que c'est inventé là-bas? Et vice-versa. Bref, quel commentaire vous suscite, n'est-ce pas, cette dimension-là?
Ben, merci beaucoup pour la question. Elle est très pertinente et en effet, elle est alignée avec cet événement. Je pense que tout ce qui a été référencé aujourd'hui dans la table ronde, c'est pas juste valide pour Montréal ou pour Canada, c'est valide à l'échelle mondiale. Que ce soit les questions de formation, le manque d'experts, la nécessité absolue de bien former les gens, etc. Que ce soit les problèmes de changer de culture, de modus operandi, partir d'une philosophie de cybersécurité à une philosophie de cyber-résilience. On a parlé du présent et du futur. Ça c'est international. Hein, ça, c'est pas spécifique à un pays en particulier. Mais je vais aussi laisser nos invités, là, nos speakers. So the question is more on the international dimension of cybersecurity, especially in relation, for example, to Africa or other continents. So I mean, how what you have said affects positively the cybersecurity operation in the rest of the world.
Je peux peut-être quelques mots. Donc, contrairement aux autres menaces, la cybersécurité ne connaît pas de géographie. Et donc, c'est très important de développer des partenariats internationaux. Puis, je passe mes journées ou mes semaines à voyager le monde, essayer de développer ce genre de partenariat, mais aussi d'échanger l'information. Donc, c'est important, c'est super important de savoir c'est quoi qui se passe dans d'autres pays et d'essayer d'échanger l'information pour que, globalement, on se protège. Parce que, comme vous dites, la grille ou les réseaux sont tous interconnectés et la menace ne va pas s'arrêter aux portes du Canada juste parce que géographiquement, c'est là. Donc c'est vraiment, mon thème, c'est la collaboration, que ce soit domestique ou internationale, mais c'est là le point le plus important.
Excellent. Any other answer on that question? In English?
Probably not.
In English.
In English is
in English, of
okay.
course. English is okay.
Yeah, so at Secureworks, we protect organizations in about 80 countries around the world. And in terms of the protections, they are largely the same. It's really a matter of, again, who wants to attack what assets in those countries, but the technology applies similarly. I think what we see in terms of the international regime is, e-crime is a borderless crime. And is very difficult to enforce criminal prosecution across borders. So the requirements for collaboration across governments and across organizations to align with a borderless digital world is very difficult but very important, and comes up a lot in terms of enforcement of different regulatory and standard regimes. So any alignment across borders on that front and cooperation across borders can really help us all be more secure globally.
Charles, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there is the borderless nature. There might be some operational technology that is unique in a particular jurisdiction that might be interesting. The other thing is there's different regulations that are following, like NIST sets a certain standard, and in Europe tends to be a little more regulatory, and maybe the deployment of IoT is happening at different rates in different international locations, but the fundamentals of like malware and cyber attacks are pretty universal, and the protection and best practices, I think, are universal.
Charles, thank you so much. I believe we arrive at the end of the event. I'd like to thank you all for attending this event. My special thanks go to our speakers, and thank you so much for your insights and your precious contributions. And I thank as well the organizers of this wonderful event. And thank you all once again, and it was really a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.